I still remember the night the silence in our house became unbearable. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence you get after a long day. No, this was the kind that hums beneath your skin, whispering that something is terribly wrong. I sat at our old wooden kitchen table, the one Edward built for me on our first anniversary. It had scratches and stains, reminders of dinners, arguments, birthdays, and quiet mornings. That night, though, it felt like a witness. A witness to a secret I hadn't uncovered yet. The only sound was the ticking of my mother's clock on the wall. It was a wedding gift, and its steady rhythm once brought me comfort. But now each tick felt sharp, like a blade carving into the truth I was too scared to face. Edward came home late again. He said he'd been at another business dinner. He looked drained, or maybe guilty. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes carried the same shadow I'd been seeing for months. He tossed his jacket on the sofa, muttered something about being exhausted, and stumbled upstairs without another word. No kiss goodnight. Not even a glance my way. I watched him go, and for the first time in our 40 years together, I didn't feel pity. I felt distance. A cold, hard distance that told me I didn't know this man anymore. When I went upstairs later, I found him already asleep, or pretending to be. The faint scent of his cologne filled the room, but there was something else too. A floral perfume. Light. Sweet. Feminine. Not mine. That smell stayed with me all night. I kept turning in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what woman's scent had crept into my home. By morning, I had convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a colleague hugged him goodbye. Maybe a waitress spilled perfume on him. That's what we women do. We build excuses for men who don't deserve them. But later that day, I found something that turned my doubts into dread. I was cleaning the living room, his jacket still lying carelessly on the couch. I picked it up, shaking my head at his usual mess, and something slipped out of the pocket. A restaurant receipt. The name printed on it stopped me cold. La Magnolia Steakhouse, San Antonio. He had told me he was meeting clients in Dallas. My fingers tightened around the paper. The date was from the previous night. 2 dinners. 1 bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, our anniversary wine. I hadn't tasted that wine in 10 years. I still remembered the night he first brought it home. We had toasted to my bakery's grand opening. He'd looked at me then like I was the only woman in the world. I hadn't seen that look in a long, long time. My stomach turned. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then. But something inside me, maybe pride, maybe fear, stopped me. Instead, I folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into my apron pocket. That evening, when he came home, I studied him quietly. He smiled like nothing had happened, kissed my forehead, and said he was tired again. I smiled back. The kind of smile that hides an earthquake. When he went upstairs to shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Normally, I would never touch it. But something, instinct, intuition, survival, guided my hand. The screen was still lit. There it was, an unread email. The subject line read, "You were incredible tonight, Dad Red Heart." My breath caught. Dad. I froze. The word echoed inside me. Who called him that? With a heart. And, incredible tonight? My mind twisted with confusion. We had one son, Michael. But this message, this tone, it wasn't from him. The email address was a jumble of letters. No name, no clue. My thumb trembled as I stared at the words again, my heart beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. I set the phone down before my shaking hands could drop it. The house suddenly felt haunted. Every corner of it heavy with invisible eyes. The clock ticked louder, crueler, counting the seconds of my ignorance. I needed proof. Later that night, when Edward was asleep again, I crept into the garage. His SUV was still warm. The faint perfume scent lingered inside, the same floral one from last night. I turned on my phone's flashlight, checking every corner, every pocket, every compartment. Loose change. Old maps. Napkins. And then, my fingers brushed against something cold and smooth in the glove box. I pulled it out. A half-used tube of personal lubricant. The air left my lungs. My entire body went numb. We hadn't been intimate in years. He always said he was tired. That age had made him weak. I stood there in the dark garage, staring at that small, shiny tube, an object so ordinary, yet so devastating. That's when I knew. My life wasn't what I thought it was. My marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I wiped the tube clean, placed it back where I found it, and stood silently, watching the shadow of the SUV. It was almost poetic. 40 years of love ending with one cruel discovery in a glove compartment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the words from the email. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." Whoever wrote that message wasn't just destroying my marriage. They were mocking it. And in that moment, as the clock struck midnight and my world fell apart, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry. I would wait. Because sometimes, silence is the beginning of revenge. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains, gentle and golden, the kind of morning light that used to make me feel safe. But that day, it only burned. I sat at the kitchen table again, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. The smell of roasted beans mingled with the faint trace of Edward's cologne still clinging to the air, that same smell that once meant love, now a poison I couldn't escape. He came downstairs humming softly, wearing his favorite grey shirt. He didn't look like a man hiding a secret. He looked like a man who'd already buried one. "Morning, Grace," he said, flashing me a tired smile. "I've got another meeting today. I might be late again." His voice was casual, too casual. Every word carefully placed, every expression perfectly rehearsed. He'd been lying to me for months, maybe years, and I'd been too blind to see it. I forced a smile. "Of course, dear. Take your time." He patted my shoulder, a small, meaningless gesture, and left. I watched his car disappear down the street, my reflection trembling in the windowpane. Then the silence came again. Heavy, cruel, familiar. That silence was my enemy now. I cleaned the kitchen, washed the dishes, folded laundry, anything to stop my thoughts from consuming me. But each sound, the clink of a plate, the swish of water, the ticking clock, turned into questions I couldn't answer. Who was she? How long had it been going on? Why did he do it? I told myself I needed proof. More than a perfume scent and a receipt. I needed the truth, something undeniable. My heart knew it already, but my mind needed to see it. By noon, I picked up the phone and called an old friend, Mrs. Whitmore. We hadn't spoken in months, but she had always been the kind of woman who saw through men's masks. Years ago, she'd helped me find a private investigator for a friend who was going through a similar nightmare. When she answered, I tried to sound normal, but my voice cracked halfway through. "Margaret, do you still have that investigator's number? The one who helped Lydia?" There was a pause. The kind of pause that holds pity. "Grace," she said softly. "What's going on? Did Edward?" I closed my eyes. "Please, just send me the number." A few minutes later, I got a text. "Mr. Harris. Discreet. Trustworthy." Followed by a phone number. I dialed it immediately. Each ring felt like a countdown to the end of my marriage. "Mr. Harris speaking," came a calm, measured voice. "My name is Grace Roberts," I said, my tone trembling but determined. "I need help finding the truth about my husband." He didn't ask unnecessary questions. Just said, "Meet me at 2 p.m. at Willow Cafe. Bring anything that could help." When I hung up, I felt something strange. Not relief, not hope, but control. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I was taking my life back, piece by piece. The cafe was small and quiet, tucked between a florist shop and a bookstore. I sat by the window, clutching my purse so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries should have been comforting. Once, they reminded me of my bakery. Now, they only made me think of all the things I'd lost. When Mr. Harris arrived, he wasn't what I expected. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a gentle face that looked like it had seen too much. He sat down and spoke softly. "Mrs. Roberts, tell me everything." I handed him a small envelope. Inside were the photos I'd taken, the restaurant receipt, the email screenshot, even a note describing the tube I found in the car. "I don't have solid proof," I admitted, "but I know something's wrong." He looked through each piece carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he closed the envelope and nodded. "I'll start today," he said simply. "Don't contact him. Act normal. If he's hiding something, I'll find it." I nodded, unable to speak. That night, Edward didn't come home until after midnight. He smelled of wine and smoke, his eyes glassy and distant. "You waited up for me?" he asked with a faint smirk. I smiled, my voice calm. "Old habits die hard." He chuckled, kissed my forehead, and stumbled upstairs. I followed quietly, watching him disappear into the bedroom. Once I was alone in the kitchen, I pulled out my phone and looked at the photos again. The proof of deceit I had started collecting like evidence from a crime scene. But what I didn't realize was that this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a trap that had been carefully built around me, one I was only beginning to escape. The next morning, I got a message from Mr. Harris. "Mrs. Roberts, I followed your husband last night. I think you need to see this." Attached was a single photo. Edward, standing outside a restaurant, holding hands with a young woman. Her name was Clara. My daughter-in-law. The wife of my only son. My vision blurred. My body went cold. I thought my heart had stopped beating. I zoomed in, my trembling fingers brushing the screen. The way they looked at each other, it wasn't father-in-law and daughter-in-law. It was lovers. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud, but I didn't move. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the kitchen started to close in. The clock ticked louder, echoing through my skull. My own family. My blood. My husband. My son's wife. Tears finally came, hot and silent. I pressed my palms against my eyes, wishing I could unsee the image. But deep down, beneath the pain and the shock, something else was growing. Something fierce, something ancient. Anger. Real, pure, unstoppable anger. And that's when I knew, this wasn't just betrayal. It was war. I didn't sleep that night. The photograph of Edward and Clara burned behind my eyelids, searing itself into my thoughts every time I closed them. My hands shook as I sat in the dark living room, the clock ticking louder with each second, reminding me that I was still here, still breathing, while everything I had built was falling apart. By sunrise, I was numb. The pain had transformed into something quieter, a dull, simmering storm just below my skin. At 9, Mr. Harris called again. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he were handling a fragile bomb. "Mrs. Roberts," he said softly, "I have more." We met at the same cafe, but this time, I didn't order coffee. My throat was too tight for anything but air. Mr. Harris slid a brown envelope across the table, his eyes heavy with pity. "Are you sure you want to see these?" he asked. I nodded. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. Edward and Clara at restaurants, in his car, leaving hotels. The images blurred together, forming a montage of betrayal. And then there were the videos. Short clips, recorded from a distance. Edward's hand brushing Clara's cheek. Clara leaning against his shoulder. Their faces glowing in candlelight, smiling, happy. Happier than I had seen him in years. A sharp, choking laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "They didn't even try to hide," I whispered. Mr. Harris hesitated. "There's more," he said quietly. "Your son, Michael. I believe he doesn't know. Clara has been meeting Edward behind his back. I have confirmation she used fake work appointments to cover her absences." I closed the envelope, my pulse hammering. "How long?" "Almost a year," he said. "A year. 12 months of lies. Family dinners, birthdays, holidays, all built on deception." I remembered Clara hugging me last Christmas, her eyes glistening as she called me Mom. I remembered Edward's hand resting on her shoulder, a casual gesture I'd once thought was fatherly affection. It all made sense now. The strange tension at the table. The way they avoided each other's eyes when Michael walked in. The faint lipstick I once found on Edward's coat, the same shade Clara wore every day. Every piece of the puzzle slid into place, forming a picture too cruel to comprehend. That night, I sat alone in the bedroom, staring at the empty side of the bed. Edward had gone to another late meeting. But I didn't cry. Not this time. The tears had done their job, they had cleaned the wound. What was left now was sharper, cleaner. A kind of clarity that only comes after destruction. I opened the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a small worn photo, our wedding picture. We looked so young, so hopeful. I traced the outline of his smile with my thumb and whispered, "You destroyed everything we built, Edward. But you forgot, I helped you build it." And I can destroy it too. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I cooked his favorite meals. I laughed at his jokes. I acted like the wife he thought was too weak to know the truth. Each night he came home later, spinning new lies, and each time I smiled and kissed his cheek, hiding the storm behind my calm eyes. Mr. Harris continued sending me reports. He had even found hotel bills under Clara's name, places Edward had booked for them both. He documented everything, carefully and discreetly. And then one evening, he called with something that shattered me all over again. "Mrs. Roberts," he said, "I followed Clara after she left Edward last night. She went home to your son. They were celebrating. She told him she's pregnant." My breath caught. "Pregnant?" "Yes," he said gently. "Your son believes it's his child." The room began to spin. I pressed a hand to my chest, gasping for air. Pregnant. With Edward's child. My husband's blood inside my son's wife. That was the moment I felt something inside me snap. Not in a way that broke me, but in a way that rebuilt me into something else. Something unrecognizable. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Men like Edward thrive on explanations. On chances. On forgiveness they don't deserve. No, I would let him hang himself with his own lies. But when the time came, when I finally looked him in the eyes and told him I knew everything, I wanted him to feel what he'd done. To taste the pain he'd fed me. And I would make sure he remembered it for the rest of his life. The following week, I pretended to plan a small family dinner. Just a casual gathering, me, Edward, Michael, and Clara. I told them I wanted to celebrate Clara's good news. Edward smiled, a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but he agreed. Clara hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Mom. You're the only one who understands." I smiled, returning her hug. "Of course, dear. I understand more than you think." Inside, I was screaming. Outside, I was grace itself. That night, I called Mr. Harris one last time. "Thank you," I said. "You've done enough. I'll handle it from here." There was a pause. "Mrs. Roberts, I've seen what this kind of betrayal can do. Don't do anything you'll regret." I smiled faintly. "Regret? No, Mr. Harris. I'm far past regret." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't fragile anymore. Her eyes were steady, her mouth curved into something between sorrow and power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of what I was capable of. The night before the family dinner, rain tapped gently against the windows, and the house smelled of lemon polish and slow-cooked stew. Everything looked perfect, normal, warm. But inside me, there was nothing but ice. I moved through the kitchen like I was choreographing a performance. Every plate, every candle, every folded napkin was part of a script only I knew. I had become a master of calmness, a woman who could host a dinner for the people who had destroyed her and never let her hands tremble. Edward was upstairs, showering after work. Clara had called earlier, her voice full of sugar. Michael was bringing dessert. I listened to their words like a scientist observing a virus under glass. No anger, no panic, just fascination. When Edward came down, dressed neatly, he looked at the table and smiled. "You went all out, Grace," he said. I turned and smiled back. "It's a special night." He didn't ask why. That was the thing about him. He never wanted to know the truth unless it was convenient. I'd spent days thinking about what revenge meant. Should I expose them publicly? Destroy their marriage? Tell Michael? But that would make me a victim in everyone's story. I wanted something else, something quiet, elegant, unforgettable. So I planned it the way he used to plan his lies. With patience. Every time he left the house, I made notes. Where he went, how long he stayed, what he touched when he came home. I learned his habits again, but not like a wife, like a hunter. I studied Clara, too. Her perfume, her phone patterns, even the way she talked to Michael. I found the places where they thought no one could see, the language of small gestures, a flicker of shared guilt. The more I watched, the calmer I became. Anger had turned to clarity. On the day of the dinner, I looked at my reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror wore a soft cream dress and pearls. Her hair was neat, her makeup subtle. She looked like forgiveness itself. But in her eyes, There was a storm. I placed a small bottle inside the drawer near the table. Not poison. Nothing fatal. Just a reminder, a sting that would last. The idea wasn't to destroy him. It was to leave a mark he could never hide. Because betrayal doesn't end with words, it needs memory. The doorbell rang. Michael walked in first, cheerful and oblivious, carrying a box of pastries. Clara followed, radiant, holding her belly like a proud secret. Edward's eyes flicked toward her. Just for a second. I saw it, the spark he couldn't suppress. I greeted them warmly. "You're glowing, Clara," I said. "Thank you, Mom," she beamed. Edward laughed too loudly. Grace's cooking will make anyone glow. The table filled with conversation. I served dishes, poured wine, listened to laughter that didn't reach my heart. The clinking of silverware was almost musical, every sound weaving the web tighter around them. At one point, Michael reached for Clara's hand. "I still can't believe we're having a baby." She smiled, eyes soft with guilt. "Neither can I." I looked at Edward then. His face paled just a little, a flicker of panic crossing his features before he hid it behind another sip of wine. Inside, I felt nothing. Just satisfaction. After dessert, Michael received a phone call from a client. He excused himself and stepped outside to take it. That left the three of us. The air changed. Edward avoided my gaze. Clara toyed with her necklace, the gold one I had given her on her wedding day. I leaned back and said softly, "Family dinners are important, don't you think? They remind us who we really are." Clara nodded nervously. "Of course," Edward murmured. "Grace, are you all right?" I smiled. "Perfectly." The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the windows like a slow drum. Then very quietly, I said, "It's funny how families share everything. Love, trust, even secrets." Clara's fork slipped from her hand. Edward's eyes snapped to mine. "Grace," he began, but I raised my hand. "No, Edward. Not tonight. Tonight is about honesty. And I want to thank you both for teaching me that love without respect is just a beautiful way to drown." Neither of them spoke. Clara's breathing quickened. Edward opened his mouth again, but I stood up, collected the plates, and said in a calm voice, "I'll bring coffee." In the kitchen, I leaned on the counter, listening to the murmurs behind me. Their whispers, half panic, half guilt, were music. When I returned with the tray, the cups clinked softly as I set them down. I sat across from them, my smile unwavering. "I forgive you," I said. Edward's mouth fell open. "Grace." "I forgive you," I repeated. "Because what's done is done. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It just changes who holds the power." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Please." I stood and looked at them both. "Drink your coffee. You'll need the warmth." They hesitated, confused, but obeyed. As they lifted the cups, I felt the smallest flicker of triumph. The coffee wasn't poisoned, it was clean. But the fear that followed them after that night would be the real punishment. They would never know what I might have done. And fear, I had learned, lasts longer than pain. Later, when they left, Edward tried to touch my shoulder. I stepped aside. "Grace," he whispered, "we can fix this." I looked at him, steady and cold. "You can't fix what you buried alive." He didn't reply. He simply walked into the rain. Clara followed, trembling. I stood by the window as they drove away, the storm swallowing their car. My reflection in the glass looked peaceful, almost holy. But inside, a single promise echoed, "You're not done yet." The morning light crept through the curtains like an uninvited guest, pale and cold. I had not slept. My mind, a quiet storm of plans and precision. Revenge wasn't born of rage anymore. It had matured into something calm, deliberate, almost graceful. Edward had always underestimated me. He thought of me as the quiet one, the gentle shadow that kept his world in order. He never realized that silence can be the sharpest blade. That week, I began to prepare my final act. Every lie he told, every betrayal he buried, I was going to exhume them all in broad daylight. I started with the bakery. For 40 years, that small shop had been my sanctuary, my symbol of creation. It was time to turn it into a stage. I called for a small community event, a celebration of love and legacy. The flyer went out across town. Everyone was invited. Neighbors, friends, even family. I made sure the invitation reached Daniel and Clara, too. When Edward came home that night, he found me humming softly as I kneaded dough. "You're in good spirits," he said, his tone casual, oblivious. "I am," I replied with a smile that felt like armor. "It's time to celebrate what we've built." He nodded, kissed my cheek, and went upstairs. The irony was almost poetic. Over the next few days, I set everything in motion. I spent hours curating a digital slideshow for the event. Photos of our family, the bakery, and all the beautiful memories we had shared. But at the end of that slideshow, I added something new. Evidence. The emails, the receipts, and the photos Thomas had taken. Every proof of betrayal, framed not as gossip, but as truth unveiled. The night before the event, I stood alone in the kitchen. The clock ticked, the same one that had witnessed decades of my quiet suffering. I looked up at it and whispered, "Tomorrow, you'll finally hear me speak." When the day came, the bakery was filled with people. Laughter, chatter, the smell of sugar and cinnamon. An illusion of warmth. I greeted everyone with grace, my smile steady, my hands firm. Then I saw them, Edward, in his grey suit, and Clara, trailing behind with a forced smile. She avoided my gaze. Edward looked proud, almost smug. He had no idea. When it was time, I walked to the small stage, microphone in hand. The chatter faded. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Today, we're here to celebrate love, what it gives, and sometimes, what it takes." The slideshow began. Childhood photos. The bakery's opening day. Our anniversaries. Then, as the final image faded, I paused. The room was still. "Love," I said softly, "is trust. And when that trust is broken, something inside us breaks too. But what's beautiful," I smiled faintly, "is how we rebuild." Then came the last slide, Julian, Clara, the hotel balcony. The room gasped. The whispers began, sharp and fast. Clara's face drained of color. Edward froze, his jaw tight. His eyes darting to me like a man realizing too late that the walls are closing in. I stood there, tall, steady. "This," I said, "is what happens when you forget the value of truth." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. My voice was calm, even kind. That made it hurt more. Edward stood up, muttering something about lies, but I held up a small USB drive. "Every image, every receipt, every message. I've already sent them to the families involved. And to Daniel." The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Edward's lips parted, but no sound came out. Clara's mascara streaked down her face, her trembling hands covering her mouth. I turned to them both. "You see," I said, "you didn't just betray a wife or a family. You betrayed a woman who once believed in you. And that woman is gone now." Then, with quiet grace, I stepped down from the stage, removed my apron, and placed it on the counter. "The bakery is yours now," I said to no one in particular. "But you'll never bake peace here again." As I walked out, the cool autumn air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I breathed freely. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. Weeks later, I moved to the coast, a small cottage overlooking the sea. The world was quieter there. Sometimes I still hear the clocks ticking in my dreams, but now it doesn't accuse me. It reminds me that time, no matter how cruel, always moves forward. I started baking again, not for customers, but for myself. And one morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost my life. I had simply outgrown the lie I once called home. And in that moment, as the waves crashed and the scent of bread filled the air, I whispered, "Forgive me, perhaps, but never again." The day after the event, the town was silent in a way I'd never felt before. People still walked their dogs, still bought bread and milk, but whenever I passed by, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed me, not with pity, but with quiet awe. The truth had done its work. Edward didn't come home that night. Or the next. I later heard from a neighbor that he'd packed a bag and left for a hotel outside town. Clara vanished too. The two of them, once so careful, so secretive, now couldn't walk down a street without whispers chasing their heels. The same walls that had once sheltered their lies now echoed with their shame. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just sat in my kitchen, staring at the half-empty teacup on the table. 40 years of marriage, dissolved into silence and broken porcelain. When Daniel arrived 3 days later, I almost didn't recognize him. His face was pale, his jaw set tight. He stood in the doorway for a long time before saying, "Mom, please tell me it isn't true." I looked at him, my only son, the best part of the life I had built, and my heart cracked open. "I wish I could," I whispered. "But it is." He sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who'd once brought me dandelions from the backyard, saying they were sunflowers. Now, he was a man staring at the wreckage of 2 families. "She told me she was visiting her mother," he said bitterly. "And all this time," his voice broke. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Daniel, I know it hurts. But sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who show us who we truly are, by breaking us." He looked up at me, his eyes red. "How are you so calm?" I smiled softly. "Because I've already burned. There's nothing left to destroy." He stayed for a while. We talked about memories, the good ones, before he left to clear his head. As I watched him drive away, I felt something shift inside me. The pain didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip, just enough to let me breathe again. In the weeks that followed, I sold the house. It was easier than I thought it would be. Every corner carried ghosts, laughter that wasn't real, love that had expired quietly in the night. I packed what I needed, donated the rest, and left the key under the welcome mat. When I reached the coast, the sea greeted me like an old friend. The waves rolled endlessly, patient and forgiving. I rented a small cottage near the cliff, where the morning light spilled through lace curtains and the only sound was the wind. For the first time in decades, I woke without fear of disappointment. Every morning, I baked, not for customers, but for peace. The scent of bread and vanilla filled the little kitchen. I'd sit by the window, sip tea, and watch the gulls dance over the water. It wasn't happiness, exactly. More like quiet survival. One evening, I took out an old photo album. There we were, younger, smiling, holding hands. The woman in the photo didn't know what was coming. I looked at her for a long time, then closed the album. I wasn't angry anymore. Sometimes, healing isn't about forgiveness. It's about no longer needing revenge. Months passed. The town had moved on, but every now and then I'd get a letter. A friend telling me that Edward had left Clara after their affair fell apart. That he'd been seen drinking alone, looking older than his years. That Clara had moved away, unable to bear the stairs. I read those letters once, then tucked them away, unbothered. They weren't my story anymore. On my 68th birthday, Daniel came to visit. He brought flowers, yellow lilies, and hugged me for a long time. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm proud of you. You didn't let them take your light." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't known in years. "I didn't let them," I said. "I simply learned to shine elsewhere." That night, as the waves crashed against the rocks, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. The air smelled of salt and freedom. I thought of the girl I once was, the wife I had been, and the woman I had become. Betrayal had broken me, but only so I could rebuild myself with stronger hands. And somewhere deep inside, I knew, I had finally won. Sometimes, life doesn't give us the ending we deserve. It gives us the one we need to find ourselves again. If my story reached something inside you, if you've ever loved too deeply, trusted too blindly, or risen from a heartbreak that almost destroyed you, then, my dear, you carry the same fire I did. We are not broken women. We are stories that refuse to end in sorrow. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you believe in second chances, in quiet strength, and in the beauty that comes after pain, stay with me here on Old Soul Stories. Because somewhere in these words, you might just find a piece of your own heart coming home.